The Pacific Northwest rain didn't fall, it drummed. It beat against the cedar shingles of the isolated Oregon cabin like 1,000 impatient fingers. For most, the sound was a lullaby. For Danielle Knox, it was acoustic camouflage. Danielle stood in the doorway of the small, dimly lit bedroom, a steaming mug of black coffee warming her calloused hands. Her eyes, the color of winter steel, were locked on the small figure tangled in the superhero bedsheets. Ryder, 7 years old, with a mop of unruly brown hair and a profound innocence that Danielle fought every single day to protect. He let out a soft, rhythmic breath, his chest rising and falling in the peaceful cadence of deep sleep. A ghost of a smile touched Danielle's lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. She stepped lightly into the room, her bare feet making absolutely zero sound on the hardwood floor, an old habit from a past life that she couldn't and wouldn't unlearn. She gently brushed a stray curl from Ryder's forehead. His skin was warm. Safe. Safe. The word felt like a lie on her tongue. Danielle rolled down the sleeve of her flannel shirt, covering the jagged, faded scar that wrapped around her left forearm, a souvenir from a botched extraction in Kandahar 6 years ago. Before she was a single mother baking cupcakes for the PTA. Danielle Knox was a ghost. She was the tip of the spear for a classified Joint Special Operations Command (JSOC) unit that didn't officially exist. They did the dirty work, the impossible work, and when the work was done, they were supposed to disappear. Danielle had disappeared perfectly. She traded her tactical vest for an apron, her call sign for Mom. But as she looked at her sleeping son, the familiar, icy knot of paranoia tightened in her gut. Peace, for a woman who had built her life on war, always felt like a borrowed garment. Eventually, the rightful owner comes to take it back. At 2:14 a.m., the rightful owner knocked. It wasn't a sound at the front door. It was a vibration, deep, mechanical, and muffled. Danielle froze. The coffee mug in her hand remained perfectly still. Not a single ripple disturbing the dark liquid. She listened. The drumming rain outside. The wind howling through the Douglas firs. And there it was again. It was coming from beneath the floorboards in the hallway closet. Danielle's heart skipped a single beat before her military training slammed an iron cage over her emotions. Her breathing slowed, her pupils dilated, adjusting to the shadows. She set the mug down on the dresser with surgical precision. She walked to the hallway closet, knelt, and pressed her fingers against a specific, seemingly ordinary wooden plank. With a swift, practiced motion, she unlatched a hidden compartment. Inside lay a black, dust-covered Pelican case. Inside the case was an encrypted satellite burner phone. A phone she hadn't touched in 4 years. A phone that only 3 people on the face of the earth had the number to. It was flashing a violent, urgent red. Danielle stared at it. Answering that phone meant opening a door she had deadbolted and buried. But ignoring it wasn't an option. In her world, a ringing burn phone in the middle of the night meant only one thing: someone was bleeding. She picked it up and pressed the green button. She didn't say a word. Silence was the first line of defense. "Donnie." The voice on the other end was a wet, rattling gasp. It sounded like drowning. "Marcus." Danielle breathed, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus Vance, her former spotter, her brother in arms, the man who had pulled her from the wreckage in Mogadishu. "Donnie, listen to me." Marcus choked out. The sound of heavy, labored breathing filled the receiver, accompanied by the distinct, Metallic clink of spent brass casings hitting a concrete floor. He was in a firefight. I don't have time. They're cleaning house. Who is? Danielle demanded, her tone shifting from mother to commander in a fraction of a second. The maternal softness vanished, replaced by a lethal, uncompromising edge. The brass. The Pentagon. Marcus coughed. A wet, agonizing sound. Operation Blackout. Someone at the very top is erasing the unit. Erasing all of us. Elias is dead. Sarah. God. Donnie. They got Sarah in Berlin yesterday. A cold void opened in Danielle's chest. Sarah. Beautiful, fierce Sarah, who had been Ryder's godmother before they all had to scatter to the winds. Marcus, where are you? I'm coming to you, Danielle said, her mind already calculating flight times, weapons caches, and tactical approaches. No, Marcus shouted, the effort clearly costing him dearly. I'm already gone. Donnie, I took 3 to the chest. I stayed on the comms just to warn you. They know about Oregon. They traced the old pension files. They're coming for you. You have to take the boy and run. Run, Donnie. They aren't taking prisoners. They want us ghosts permanently, dead. Marcus, don't you close your eyes. Marcus. Tell Ryder. Tell him, Uncle Marcus said. A sudden, deafening crack echoed through the speaker. A gunshot. Then, the sickening thud of a body hitting the floor. Marcus? Nothing but the static of the encrypted line. Then, a new voice came over the receiver. Calm, professional, and terrifyingly close. Target 3 eliminated. Tracing the final call. We have a ping in the Pacific Northwest. Send the extraction team. No survivors. Danielle crushed the phone in her hand, snapping the plastic casing, and hurled the battery into the darkness. She didn't have time to grieve. She didn't have time to cry for her dead friends. Grief was a luxury for the living. And right now, she and Ryder were inches away from becoming corpses. She had exactly 3 minutes. Maybe less if they had advanced elements already in the woods. Danielle moved. She was a blur in the darkness. She ripped open the false bottom of the closet floor. Out came a customized Glock 19 with a suppressor, 2 extra magazines, a tactical combat knife, and a pre-packed leather duffel bag stuffed with fake passports, untraceable cash, and first aid supplies. She chambered around. The soft click-clack was the sound of a mother shifting from sanctuary to warfare. She glided back into Ryder's room. She didn't turn on the light. Ryder, she whispered, her voice steady, radiating an unnatural calm. She touched his shoulder. The boy stirred, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Mommy, is it morning? No, baby. It's time to play the midnight game, she said softly. Ryder sat up instantly. They had practiced this. To him, it was a thrilling secret game they played on random nights. To Danielle, it was a desperate rehearsal for this exact moment. The silent game? Ryder whispered, his small eyes widening in the dark. That's right, my brave boy. The silent game. Not a single word. Not a single sound. No matter what happens, you hold my hand, and you don't let go. Do you understand? Ryder nodded solemnly. He slipped out of bed, grabbing his favorite stuffed bear. Danielle grabbed his small jacket, wrapping it around his shoulders. Suddenly, the ambient light in the room shifted. Danielle dropped to one knee, pulling Ryder down with her. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw it. 4 heavy, black SUVs were rolling up her long gravel driveway. Their headlights cut, moving purely on night vision. They were moving with tactical precision. Military. Professional. The Pentagon sent their best, she thought, a dark, primal rage igniting deep within her soul. They sent wolves to kill a sheep. But they forgot one thing. Danielle tightened her grip on the Glock, her eyes burning with a fierce, uncompromising fire. I was never a sheep. I am the apex predator. Stay low, Ryder, she breathed into his ear. Time to go. Danielle led him out of the bedroom. Moving toward the kitchen, she bypassed the doors. The doors were fatal choke points. Instead, she moved to the pantry, kicking away a sack of potatoes to reveal a heavy iron latch on the floor. The storm cellar. It led to a drainage pipe that emptied half a mile away in the dense forest. The sound of shattering glass echoed from the front porch. The heavy, muffled thud of a breaching charge blowing the front door off its hinges followed a second later. Heavy boots hit the hardwood. Clear the ground floor. Find the woman and the kid. Double tap on sight. A gruff voice commanded from the living room. Danielle hoisted the cellar door open. The damp, earthy smell of the underground tunnel hit her. She lowered Ryder down first, handing him the duffel bag. I'm right behind you, baby, she whispered. Before she descended, Danielle paused. She looked back at the warm, cozy house she had painstakingly built. The framed photos on the wall. The height chart penciled on the doorframe. The life she had scraped together with blood and tears was being trampled by heavy boots in the next room. Whoever sat in the plush, air-conditioned offices of the Pentagon, whoever gave the order to murder her family, had made a fatal miscalculation. They thought they were tying up loose ends. They thought they were eliminating a liability. They didn't realize they had just awoken a monster. Danielle pulled the cellar door shut above her just as the beam of a tactical flashlight swept across the kitchen floor. Plunged into darkness, she took her son's hand. They were running tonight. They would hide in the shadows, sleep in the dirt, and disappear off the grid. But she wouldn't run forever. Once Ryder was safe, the rules of engagement would change. The United States government wanted a war? Danielle's finger rested lightly on the trigger of her weapon. They're going to get one. The earth smelled of rot, rust, and desperate salvation. Inside the narrow drainage pipe, the world was reduced to the sound of splashing mud, Ryder's ragged breathing, and the distant, muffled thuds of heavy boots destroying their home above. Danielle crawled forward on her elbows and knees, the cold slime soaking through her flannel shirt. Her customized Glock 19 securely holstered but ready. Keep going, Ryder, she whispered, her voice bouncing off the curved corrugated steel. Don't look back, just follow the water. Ryder was sobbing silently, his tiny hands clutching the stuffed bear in one hand and the heavy leather duffel bag in the other. He was terrified, but he was obeying. That was the blessing and the curse of raising a child in the shadow of a ghost. He knew how to follow orders when the tone shifted. A deafening boom reverberated through the earth behind them, shaking dirt loose from the top of the pipe. They had breached the storm cellar. They're in the tunnels, a voice echoed faintly from the entrance of the pipe. Bring up the thermals. Danielle's blood ran cold. Thermals. Thermal imaging cameras would spot their body heat through the thin metal of the pipe like glowing beacons. Move, Ryder. Faster, she urged, pushing the boy gently by the hips. She scrambled forward, the rough metal tearing at her jeans and skin. The exit was a faint, gray semicircle of light 50 yards ahead. They burst out of the pipe and tumbled down a muddy embankment, crashing into the thick, thorny underbrush of the Oregon wilderness. The freezing, torrential rain hit them instantly. It was a miserable, bone-chilling downpour, and it was the greatest gift God could have given them. The rain, Danielle gasped, pulling Ryder under the dense canopy of a massive cedar tree. It masks our heat signatures. They can't see us from the air. And their thermals are useless in this downpour. She stripped off her soaked flannel shirt, shivering as the icy wind bit her bare arms, revealing the network of faded scars that crisscrossed her skin. She pulled a dark, waterproof tactical poncho from the duffel bag and wrapped it tightly around Ryder, swallowing him in the oversized fabric. "Mommy, my hands are freezing," Ryder whimpered, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. The midnight game had lost its magic. The reality of the cold, dark woods was setting in. Danielle felt a sharp pang in her chest, a mother's heartbreak. She pulled his cold face against her neck, kissing his wet hair. "I know, baby. I know it hurts, but you are the bravest boy in the world. I need you to be a statue for me now. A quiet, invisible statue. Can you do that?" Ryder nodded against her collarbone, burying his face in her shoulder. Suddenly, a blinding beam of white light sliced through the trees just 50 yards to their left. Then another, and another. The extraction team hadn't just breached the house, they had surrounded the perimeter. Danielle's trained eyes quickly analyzed their movements. There were at least 6 men sweeping the treeline, moving with a disciplined, staggered formation. They weren't local SWAT, they weren't FBI. The way they held their suppressed HK-416 assault rifles, the way they communicated with silent hand signals, these were Tier 1 operators. Private military contractors, likely Blackwater or a shadow equivalent, bought and paid for by the Pentagon slush fund. They sent my own kind to kill me, Danielle thought, her grip tightening on the handle of her combat knife. "Stay here," she breathed into Ryder's ear, wedging him deeply into the hollowed-out root system of the giant cedar. She piled dead ferns and wet pine needles over him until he was completely camouflaged. "Close your eyes. Cover your ears. Do not come out until I say the password. Lighthouse. You hear me? Lighthouse," Ryder whispered back, his voice shaking. Danielle slipped away, melting into the shadows. She didn't walk, she stalked. Every footfall was carefully placed on moss or soft mud. Avoiding dry twigs, she became the forest. She tracked the closest operator. He was separated from his partner by about 20 yards. Separated by a thick grove of Douglas firs. He was wearing state-of-the-art night vision goggles, NVGs. Slowly panning his rifle left and right. Danielle knew the weakness of NVGs. They destroy your peripheral vision, narrowing the world down to a grainy tunnel. She climbed the slick bark of a low-hanging oak tree, positioning herself directly above his patrol path. She controlled her breathing, in-out, in-out. Her heartbeat slowed to a rhythmic, predatory thump. The operator stepped directly beneath her branch. He paused, raising a hand to his earpiece. "Viper 3 to command," he muttered, his voice gravelly. "No visual on the targets. The thermal optics are useless in this washout. Requesting drone support." Request denied, Danielle thought. She dropped. It was a silent, lethal descent. She landed squarely on his shoulders, driving her knees into his collarbones to knock the wind out of him. Before he could even register the impact, Danielle's left hand clamped brutally over his mouth, pulling his head back. In her right hand, the 6-inch, carbon steel combat knife flashed in the dark. With surgical precision, She drove the blade into the soft gap between his Kevlar helmet and his tactical vest, severing the spinal cord at the base of the neck. He didn't scream. He couldn't. His body simply seized, then went entirely limp, like a puppet with its strings suddenly cut. Danielle lowered his heavy, lifeless body to the wet earth without making a single sound. She lay there for 10 seconds, her chest heaving slightly, listening. The rain masked the brief struggle. The other operators kept moving, completely unaware that they were now being hunted. She worked quickly. She stripped the operator of his comms earpiece and secured it in her own ear. She took his spare magazines, a fragmentation grenade, and his tactical radio. As she adjusted the earpiece, the encrypted channel cracked to life in her ear. Viper 3, what's your status? Over. Silence. Danielle smiled, a cold, terrifying smile that belonged to a ghost from JSOC. Not a mother from Oregon. Viper 3, respond. You are off-grid. Report. The voice on the comms was growing tense. Danielle clicked the mic button twice. Click, click. A standard military signal acknowledging a transmission. But buying time. Let them think his radio was just acting up in the storm. She glided back to the hollowed cedar root. Ryder was exactly where she left him, curled into a tight ball, trembling violently. Lighthouse, she whispered softly. Ryder let out a tiny gasp and reached out. Danielle pulled him from the roots, wiping the mud from his face. Are the bad men gone? He asked, his voice barely audible over the rain. One of them is, Danielle said grimly, but we have a long walk ahead of us. Buddy, we need to get to the cabin in the mountains. Deep in the Willamette National Forest, 10 miles from their house. Danielle had buried a secondary cache 3 years ago. It held an unregistered dirt bike, long-range sniper rifles, and enough C4 to level a city block. It was a contingency plan she prayed she would never have to use. She hefted Ryder onto her back, securing him with the straps of the duffel bag so her hands remained free. The extra weight was agonizing, but the adrenaline pumping through her veins numbed the pain. Hold on tight, monkey, she said, adjusting her stolen night vision goggles. The world snapped into sharp, green focus. We're going off the trail. As she pushed deeper into the unforgiving wilderness, leaving her burning life behind, Danielle made a silent vow. The Pentagon thought they could erase her unit to bury a secret. They thought they could send assassins into her home, terrify her son, and get away clean. They were wrong. She wasn't just going to survive. She was going to find out exactly who signed the order for Operation Blackout. And when she did, she was going to bring the war right to their doorstep. 10 miles in the Oregon backcountry is a grueling hike on a sunny afternoon. In the pitch black, during a torrential downpour, carrying a 50-pound child and 50 pounds of wet gear. It was a death march. Danielle's muscles screamed. Lactic acid burned in her thighs with every step she took up the steep, muddy incline of the Willamette Ridge. Her boots slipped on slick roots and loose shale. But she never fell. She couldn't. Ryder's arms were wrapped around her neck in a death grip, his small chest rising and falling against her back in the exhausted rhythm of a child who had cried himself to sleep. For 4 hours, Danielle moved like a phantom through the timberline. She navigated by memory and the faint green glow of the stolen night vision goggles. She avoided the logging roads. She waded chest-deep through a freezing creek for a mile to kill their scent in case they brought in tracking dogs. Operation Blackout. The words echoed in her mind, syncing with the crunch of her boots. The Pentagon was wiping the slate clean. They were burning the JSOC unit to the ground, erasing the operators who knew where all the bodies were buried. Marcus was dead. Sarah was dead. Elias was dead. The earpiece she had taken from the dead contractor crackled with static. For the first 2 hours, the tactical channel had been a chaotic mess of overlapping voices, command barking orders. Viper Squad reporting the breach. The realization that the targets had slipped the net. And the grim discovery of Viper 3's body. Now, the chatter had chilled into something far more disciplined. And far more dangerous. Viper Actual to command. A voice rasped over the comms. It was a voice like crushed glass. Calm, soulless. Target footprint lost at the creek. The storm is washing away all tracks. Requesting immediate perimeter expansion. She's carrying a 70-pound deadweight. She can't have gone far. Danielle's jaw clenched. Viper Actual, the squad leader. He was smart, but he underestimated a mother's endurance. Copy. Viper Actual. A slick, bureaucratic voice replied from command. Likely someone sitting in a climate-controlled operations center in Virginia. We need this contained before sunrise. The director wants her neutralized. No loose ends. The director. Danielle filed that away. A high-ranking suit was running the op. By 6 a.m., the rain finally began to ease into a thick, miserable mist. The sky turned the color of a bruised plum. Danielle reached the face of a massive, sheer granite cliff that looked utterly unremarkable to a hiker's eye. It was overgrown with aggressive blackberry brambles and thick moss. She set Ryder down gently under the overhang of a boulder. He shivered, his lips pale blue, his eyes exhausted and hollow. "We're here, Ryder," she whispered, taking his freezing hands and rubbing them briskly. "Just one more minute, okay? Mommy's got the magic key." Danielle walked to the cliff face. She didn't look for a handle. Instead, she pushed her hand deep into a patch of thorny brambles. Ignoring the sharp pricks tearing at her knuckles, her fingers found a cold, biometric scanner bolted directly into the stone. She pressed her right thumb against the glass. A tiny, muffled beep sounded. Hydraulics hissed quietly. A sound swallowed by the wind. A heavy, rock-faced steel door, perfectly camouflaged to match the granite, popped open 2 inches. Danielle grabbed the edge and hauled it open, revealing a pitch-black tunnel. She grabbed Ryder and the duffel bag. Stepping inside and pulling the heavy door shut behind them, the locking mechanism engaged with a heavy, satisfying thud. Instantly, the roar of the wind and rain vanished. It was dead silent, dry, safe. Danielle flipped a switch on the wall. A row of low-wattage LED lights flickered to life, illuminating a 30 by 30-foot subterranean bunker. It was a survivalist's wet dream, built with shadow budget funds she had siphoned years ago. Dehumidifiers hummed, racks of MREs, meals ready to eat, lined the walls next to gallons of purified water. In the corner sat a matte black, electric stealth dirt bike, 0 emissions, 0 noise. But it was the center of the room that held the real treasure. 4 heavy Pelican cases, stacked like coffins. Danielle didn't go for the weapons yet. She was a mother first. She stripped Ryder out of his soaked clothes, wrapping him in 2 thick, military-grade thermal blankets. She fired up a small propane camp stove and heated a pouch of chicken noodle MRE and a cup of hot cocoa. "Drink this slowly, buddy," she said, wrapping his hands around the warm aluminum cup. The color slowly began to return to his cheeks. "Mommy?" Ryder asked, his voice trembling as he took a sip. "Why did those men come to our house? Did we do something bad?" Danielle's heart shattered, but her face remained a mask of absolute calm. She knelt in front of him, looking directly into his innocent eyes. "No, Ryder, we didn't do anything bad," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "A long time ago, before you were born, Mommy worked for some very powerful people. I protected them, but sometimes, when powerful people do bad things, they get scared of the people who know their secrets. They are scared of me. And cowards do terrible things when they are scared." Ryder looked at her, processing the heavy truth. "Are you scared, Mommy?" Danielle smiled, a genuine, fierce smile. "No, baby, I'm not scared. I am angry. And in our family, when bullies come to our door, we don't hide forever. We teach them a lesson." She kissed his forehead. "You eat, then you sleep. You are perfectly safe here. 10 feet of solid granite and steel. Nobody can find us." Once Ryder was settled on a cot, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, Danielle turned her attention to the Pelican cases. She popped the latches. Inside the first case lay a customized Daniel Defense Mk-18 short-barreled rifle, complete with an EOTech holographic sight, a PEQ-15 laser module, and a suppressor. It was a close-quarters monster. Next to it was a sleek, bolt-action Remington 700 sniper rifle chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, capable of taking a man's head off from a mile away. The second case held body armor, tactical chest rigs, and comms equipment. The third case held explosives, C4 plastic explosive blocks, blasting caps, and remote detonators. Danielle stripped off her wet, civilian clothes. She dried off, the faded scars of her past operations standing out starkly against her pale skin. She pulled on black tactical cargo pants, a moisture-wicking combat shirt, and strapped a lightweight Kevlar plate carrier to her chest. She was no longer the woman who baked cookies in Oregon. Danielle Knox was dead. Ghost 20 was back online. She grabbed the stolen earpiece and rigged it into her own secure radio setup, boosting the signal so she could listen in without broadcasting her location. She sat at a small metal desk, methodically cleaning and oiling the Mk-18, listening to the enemy chatter. "Command, this is Viper Actual." The squad leader's voice cut through the static again. "We've swept a 5-mile radius. Nothing. Local PD is getting suspicious about the explosion at the house. We need to sanitize the scene and pull back." "Negative. Viper Actual." The slick voice from Washington snapped. "The director is flying into Portland International in 3 hours to oversee the containment personally. He is bringing a Tier 1 sweeper team. If she makes it to the press, or worse, to a congressional oversight committee, we all hang. Find her." Danielle stopped oiling her rifle. The metal rag went perfectly still in her hands. "The director is flying into Portland. He was coming to her backyard. The man who ordered the deaths of her friends, the man who sent killers into her son's bedroom, was stepping out from behind his desk in the Pentagon and walking right into her crosshairs." A cold, dangerous calm washed over her. They thought she was running. They thought she was trying to survive. Danielle slammed a 30-round magazine of 5.56 armor-piercing rounds into the Mk-18 and racked the charging handle. The mechanical clack echoed loudly in the bunker. She wasn't trying to survive. She was going hunting. Leaving a child behind goes against every biological imperative a mother possesses. It feels like tearing out your own heart and leaving it beating on a cold steel table. But Danielle Knox knew that if she stayed in that bunker, waiting for the Pentagon to eventually crack the vault, both her heart and her son would stop beating forever. Ryder was asleep on the cot, his breathing finally deep and even, the exhaustion of the night having pulled him into a heavy, dreamless state. Danielle stood over him, fully geared up. She wore a lightweight, low-visibility plate carrier over a black tactical soft-shell jacket. Her Mk-18 rifle was slung tightly across her chest, and a heavily modified Remington 700 sniper rifle, broken down into 2 pieces, was strapped in a protective scabbard to her back. She knelt beside the cot, brushing a soft kiss against Ryder's warm forehead. "I love you, monkey," she whispered, her voice cracking for the first and last time that night. "I'm going to fix this. I promise." She placed a handwritten note on his chest, right over his sleeping bag, and set a reinforced, encrypted tablet next to his pillow. It was preloaded with offline games, movies, and a single, one-way communication button, if she didn't return in 48 hours. The bunker's automated systems would send an SOS burst to a trusted, off-grid journalist in Geneva. It was a failsafe she prayed she wouldn't trigger. Danielle stepped back, her face hardening into granite. The mother was gone. Ghost 20 was online. She walked to the massive steel vault door and engaged the internal lockdown protocol. The heavy deadbolts slid into place with a mechanical finality. Inside, it was a fortress. Outside, it was a war zone. She threw a leg over the matte black, electric stealth dirt bike. It was a custom-modified Zero FX, stripped of all reflectors and painted with radar-absorbent polymer. She twisted the throttle. There was no engine roar, no exhaust smoke, just a faint, high-pitched electronic whine, like a jet turbine spooling up in a vacuum. Danielle hit the switch for the hidden exterior exit. A section of the rocky cliff face 50 yards away slid open, revealing a ramp hidden beneath the dense canopy. She shot out of the tunnel like a bullet leaving a suppressor, the cold morning air hitting her face through her tactical helmet. The rain had stopped, replaced by a thick, soupy fog that blanketed the Oregon logging roads. It was 6:15 a.m. The director's flight was scheduled to touch down at Portland International Airport, PDX, at 9 a.m. She had roughly 2.5 hours to cover 40 miles of treacherous, unpaved wilderness, bypass local law enforcement cordons, and infiltrate one of the most heavily secured private aviation hubs in the Pacific Northwest. The ride was a blur of adrenaline and mud. Danielle pushed the electric bike to its absolute limits, drifting around sheer drop-offs and tearing through logging trails that hadn't been used in decades. She was a shadow moving at 60 miles an hour through the mist. By 8:10 a.m., the dense pine forests gave way to the industrial outskirts of Portland. The Columbia River came into view, a dark, churning ribbon of gray water bordering the northern edge of the airport. Danielle didn't head for the main commercial terminals. The director wouldn't be flying Delta. He would be landing at the Fixed Base Operator (FBO) facilities on the south side of the airfield, a private, gated section reserved for corporate jets, VIPs, and, occasionally, black flight government transports. She abandoned the dirt bike in a deep, overgrown drainage culvert 2 miles out, covering it with dead branches and a camouflage tarp. From there, She moved on foot. The area surrounding the private tarmac was an industrial wasteland of shipping containers, warehouses, and rusted gantry cranes overlooking the river. It was the perfect sniper's playground. Through her stolen comms earpiece, the chatter was picking up. Viper Actual to Sweeper Team Alpha. The package is on final approach. Wheels down in 10. Secure the perimeter. I want a complete visual lockdown. If a bird flies over that tarmac, I want its tail number. Danielle ghosted through the shadows of an abandoned lumberyard directly adjacent to the airfield's outer fence. She scaled a massive, 4-story stack of rusted shipping containers, her boots making zero sound on the wet metal. She reached the top, flattening herself against the cold, corrugated steel. She had a perfect, unobstructed view of the private runway. Range: 850 yards. She unzipped the scabbard and began assembling the Remington 700. Click, clack. The bolt slid into the receiver like a key into a lock. She threaded the massive suppressor onto the barrel and flipped open the caps of her Schmidt and Bender high-power scope. She extended the bipod and settled in behind the weapon, her eye pressing against the rubber cup of the optic. Breathe. Estimate range. Check windage. The crosswind coming off the Columbia River was brutal. A steady 10 miles per hour moving left to right. At 850 yards, a .338 Lapua Magnum bullet would drift over a foot. She dialed the windage knob on her scope, compensating for the physics of the kill. Down below, the scene was unfolding exactly as she anticipated. 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans with heavily tinted windows rolled onto the tarmac, forming a defensive V-shape. 6 men stepped out. They weren't wearing military gear, they wore sharp, dark suits. But Danielle's trained eye saw the telltale bulges of submachine guns under their jackets. The tactical earpieces, and the cold, sweeping head movements of Tier 1 operators playing Secret Service. At 8:58 a.m., a sleek, unmarked Gulfstream G650 jet pierced the low-hanging clouds and touched down on the runway. Its thrust reversers roaring, it taxied to a halt exactly 50 yards from the waiting SUVs. Package has arrived. Viper Actual's voice crackled in her ear. Alpha, hold the line. Danielle slowed her heart rate. She entered the bubble, a state of hyper-focus where the rest of the world ceased to exist. There was only the reticle of her scope, the wind, and the door of that airplane. The Gulfstream's stairs folded down. 2 more suited operators stepped out first, scanning the horizon. Then, the man himself appeared. Danielle's finger rested lightly on the 3-pound trigger. She tracked the target as he walked down the steps. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal overcoat. His silver hair perfectly styled despite the damp Oregon air. As his face came into the sharp magnification of her scope, Danielle's breath caught in her throat. The icy calm in her veins was momentarily replaced by a violent shock of betrayal. She recognized him. It wasn't some faceless bureaucrat. It was Deputy Secretary of Defense, Arthur Vance. Vance, the father of Marcus Vance, the very man who had called her last night. Bleeding out on the floor, warning her about Operation Blackout. The father had ordered the execution of his own son's Black Ops unit. He had ordered the death of his own blood to cover up a secret. The sheer, sociopathic evil of it made Danielle's stomach churn. But the hesitation lasted less than a second. Emotion was a luxury. Execution was her job. You killed your own son, Arthur, and you tried to kill mine. She placed the glowing red dot of the reticle squarely on the center of Arthur Vance's chest. Just above the lapels of his expensive coat. She exhaled slowly, letting all the air out of her lungs. At the bottom of her breath, between the beats of her heart, she applied steady, rearward pressure to the trigger. Crack! The suppressed rifle didn't roar, it coughed violently. A sharp, mechanical thwack that sounded like a heavy staple gun. A massive tongue of fire spit from the muzzle. The 250-grain armor-piercing bullet left the barrel at 2.900 feet per second. It had to travel 850 yards through the crosswind. The flight time was exactly 1.2 seconds. For 1.2 seconds, the world hung in absolute, terrifying silence. 1.2 seconds. In the span of a single heartbeat, a .338 Lapua Magnum armor-piercing round travels 8.5 football fields. It doesn't punch through the air, it violently displaces it, creating a miniature sonic boom in its wake. For Danielle Knox, looking through the Schmidt and Bender scope, time dilated. She watched the vapor trail spiral through the damp Oregon air. A deadly, invisible finger reaching out to tap Arthur Vance on the chest. At 0.8 seconds, a sudden, violent gust of thermal exhaust from the Gulfstream's idling jet engines hit the tarmac. At 1.0 seconds, Arthur Vance, reacting to the sudden blast of hot air, instinctively raised his right arm and turned his torso sharply toward the cabin door. At 1.2 seconds, the universe ripped apart. The bullet didn't strike Vance in the center of mass. Instead, it caught him just below the right collarbone. The kinetic energy of the massive round was catastrophic. It didn't just pierce him, it lifted the Deputy Secretary of Defense entirely off his feet, spinning him like a broken rag doll before slamming him violently against the steel landing gear of the jet. A fine crimson mist hung in the air where he had been standing a microsecond before. For half a second, the tarmac was frozen in a tableau of absolute shock. Then, the stolen earpiece in Danielle's ear shrieked with a deafening roar. Sniper! Contact front! The packages hit. The men in the tailored suits didn't panic. Their Tier 1 muscle memory overrode their humanity. In perfect unison, two operators dove onto Vance's bleeding body, acting as human shields, while three others laid down a blinding wall of suppressive fire toward the industrial yard. Acoustic locators have a ping. Viper Actual's voice barked over the comms. Cold and mechanical despite the chaos. Bearing 040. The shipping containers. Suppress that sector and flank. Alpha Team. Move, move, move. Danielle didn't stay to admire her work. The golden rule of sniping was simple: you shoot, you move, or you die. She rolled sideways just as the rusted steel wall of the shipping container she had been leaning against disintegrated. A hail of 5.56 mm rounds from the operator's submachine guns chewed through the corrugated metal like a chainsaw through wet cardboard, spraying her with jagged shrapnel and sparking metal. She crawled on her belly over the wet roof of the container. The heavy Remington 700 sniper rifle was a liability now. She couldn't run with it. She slapped a small, putty-like square of thermite onto the rifle's receiver and jammed a chemical detonator into it. It would burn at 4.000 degrees Fahrenheit, melting the barrel, the firing pin, and any ballistic evidence into a useless puddle of slag. Danielle grabbed the edge of the container, swung her legs over the side, and dropped 20 feet. She hit the muddy ground rolling, absorbing the impact, and came up with the suppressed Mk-18 rifle securely in her shoulder pocket. The suppressor hissed as rain began to fall again, the cold drops hitting the blistering hot metal. The industrial yard was a labyrinth of stacked timber, rusted cranes, and narrow alleyways between shipping crates. To anyone else, it was a trap. To Ghost 2-0, it was a jungle, and she was the apex predator. Alpha 1 and 2, we are pushing the left flank of the container stacks. We have her boxed in against the river. A voice echoed in her earpiece. They were close, too close. Danielle pressed her back against a stack of damp cedar logs. She controlled her breathing. In, out. She visualized the grid. 2 men coming from her left. Heavy armor. Highly trained. She didn't run away from them. She pushed toward them. Aggression, when unexpected, is the ultimate camouflage. She slipped around the corner of the logs just as Alpha 1 and Alpha 2 cleared the adjacent alley. They were moving tactically, rifles raised, checking their corners. Danielle didn't hesitate. At a distance of 15 feet, the Mk-18 was a surgical instrument. Peefed PFFT. 2 suppressed shots. A double tap to the chest of Alpha 1. The armor-piercing rounds shattered his ceramic plates, dropping him to his knees, gasping for air. Before Alpha 2 could pivot his weapon toward her, Danielle was already moving. She closed the distance in 2 explosive strides, slapping the barrel of his rifle away with her left hand while driving the stock of her Mk-18 brutally upward into his jaw. The satisfying crunch of bone echoed in the narrow space. As the man stumbled backward, disoriented, she transitioned her rifle down and fired a single round into the unprotected gap between his thigh and pelvis, the femoral artery. He collapsed instantly, the fight draining from him in a dark, terrifying pool. Danielle didn't stop. She stepped over them, stripping 2 spare magazines from their chest rigs as she moved. Alpha 1, sitrep. Alpha 2, report. Viper Actual was screaming now. The cold professionalism was fracturing. Command, we have multiple men down. The shooter is highly trained. Requesting immediate aerial lockdown. Get local PD to cordon off the Columbia River bridges. Sirens began to wail in the distance. The wailing grew from a distant hum to a deafening chorus. Portland Police, Port Authority, and probably every federal agent within a 30-mile radius were converging on her position. Danielle sprinted through the muddy yard, her lungs burning, her muscles screaming in protest. She reached the outer chain-link fence bordering the dark, churning waters of the Columbia River. She scaled the fence like a spider, vaulting over the razor wire at the top with a practiced, fluid motion. She hit the rocky embankment on the other side and scrambled down toward the water. Underneath an old, rotting wooden pier, a small, motorized Zodiac inflatable boat sat tied to a pylon, another piece of her contingency plan. Placed there 2 years ago during a paranoid, sleepless night. She slashed the mooring line with her combat knife, threw her gear into the hull, and jumped in. She yanked the pull cord on the silent electric outboard motor. It hummed to life. As the Zodiac pushed away from the bank, dissolving into the thick morning fog over the river, Danielle looked back toward the airfield. Red and blue emergency lights were painting the low clouds in frantic, sweeping strokes. She touched the earpiece. The channel was absolute chaos. Vance is critical. He's losing too much blood. Get that medevac bird in the air now. Arthur Vance wasn't dead. She had missed the kill shot. A dark, bitter frustration washed over her. But it was quickly replaced by something much colder. A terrifying clarity. Vance was alive. That meant he knew she was coming for him. The element of surprise was gone. The Pentagon would burn the entire Pacific Northwest to the ground to find her. They would declare her a domestic terrorist. They would put her face on every screen in America. Danielle sat in the stern of the boat. The freezing river spray stinging her face. The Mk-18 resting across her knees. Let them come, she thought, her steel-gray eyes locking onto the Portland skyline fading in the mist. They wanted a ghost, now they have a demon. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, encrypted burner phone. She had to get back to the bunker. She had to get back to Ryder. The real war hadn't just begun, it had just gone nuclear. The Columbia River was a freezing, churning monster, but to Danielle, it was a liquid shield. The thick morning fog clung to the surface of the water, swallowing the small Zodiac boat whole. Behind her, the wail of police sirens and the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a Coast Guard helicopter chopping through the sky faded into a dull, distant roar. 10 miles downriver, she killed the electric motor. She steered the inflatable boat into a secluded, overgrown inlet on the Oregon side. Before stepping onto the muddy bank, she pulled a heavy tungsten folding knife from her vest and methodically slashed the pontoon chambers. The Zodiac hissed violently, folding in on itself before sinking into the murky, frigid depths. It left no trace. The trek back to the drainage culvert where she had hidden the stealth dirt bike was grueling. Her muscles, previously fueled by a massive dump of combat adrenaline, were now screaming in agonizing protest. The bruised ribs from the close-quarters fight throbbed with every breath. But she didn't stop. A mother's biological clock doesn't tick in seconds. It ticks in the terrifying metric of her child's absence. By the time she navigated the Zero FX back up the treacherous, mud-slicked trails of the Willamette Ridge, it was nearly noon. Danielle approached the granite cliff face. She pressed her thumb to the biometric scanner. The heavy steel door groaned and popped open. She slipped the bike inside and hauled the door shut, engaging the heavy deadbolts. The sudden, absolute silence of the bunker was deafening. She stripped off the tactical gear. The plate carrier was heavy with rain and the metallic scent of spent brass. Her soft shell jacket was torn at the shoulder, a brutal reminder of the shrapnel from the shipping yard. She threw it all into a corner, standing in just her damp undershirt and cargo pants, shivering uncontrollably. She walked into the main living area. Ryder was sitting cross-legged on the military cot. He wasn't crying. He was staring intently at the encrypted tablet she had left him, his small fingers tracing the screen. When he heard her boots on the concrete floor, his head snapped up. "Mommy." He dropped the tablet and launched himself across the small room, slamming into her legs. Danielle dropped to her knees, burying her face in his messy brown hair. She wrapped her arms around his small frame, inhaling the scent of him, soap and little boy sweat. It was the only thing anchoring her to her humanity. "I'm here, monkey. I'm right here," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You were gone a long time." Ryder murmured into her neck. "I played the silent game just like you said. I didn't make a peep." Danielle smiled through the exhaustion, kissing his cheek. "I know you did. You are my brave soldier." She stood up, gently guiding him back to the cot. "You keep playing for a few more minutes. Okay? Mommy has to check the weather." The weather. That was their code for gathering intelligence. Danielle walked over to the bunker's communications array. A bank of 4 high-definition monitors hooked to a heavily modified, untraceable satellite uplink. She powered on the mainframe. The screens flickered to life, bathing her pale, exhausted face in a harsh blue glow. She bypassed the encrypted military channels. She didn't need to hear their tactical chatter anymore. She needed to see what the world was seeing. She pulled up the major news networks: CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. Every single channel was broadcasting the exact same breaking news banner in bold, blood-red letters. Terror attack at PDX. Deputy SECDEF critically wounded. Danielle leaned heavily against the metal desk. Her eyes locked on the screens. News anchors were scrambling, reading off teleprompters with barely contained panic. Footage from a news helicopter showed the private tarmac at Portland International. It looked like a war zone. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the wind. Medical personnel were loading a blood-soaked stretcher into a Black Hawk helicopter. Arthur Vance had survived. The armor-piercing round had shattered his collarbone and likely destroyed his right lung. But the Tier 1 medical response had kept him breathing. Then, the broadcast shifted. The anchor's face turned grim. Authorities have just released the identity of the primary suspect in this brazen assassination attempt. Sources within the Pentagon confirm that they are launching a nationwide manhunt for a rogue former military operative. A picture flashed onto all 4 screens simultaneously. It was Danielle. Not a blurry CCTV image from the airport. It was her official, classified JSOC file photo. She was in full uniform. Her hair pulled tightly back. Her steel-gray eyes staring dead into the camera. The suspect is Danielle Knox, a highly trained, highly lethal former Special Forces contractor. The FBI and Homeland Security consider her armed, extremely dangerous, and mentally unstable. A $5 million reward has been issued for information leading to her capture. They were burning her. The Pentagon wasn't just covering up Operation Blackout. They were weaponizing the entire United States law enforcement apparatus against her. They were using the media to paint her as a deranged terrorist so that when they finally put a bullet in her head, the public would applaud them. They want a villain, Danielle whispered to the empty room. Her hands curled into tight fists. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing alarm echoed from her encrypted terminal. It wasn't a news alert. It was an incoming data packet on a frequency that hadn't been active in 4 years. Danielle spun around, her fingers flying across the keyboard to isolate the signal. Sender ID, Vance. M. Status. Dead man switch activated. Marcus. Danielle's breath hitched. Marcus Vance, her dead spotter, the man who had called her last night to warn her. He had set up a contingency protocol. If his biometric monitor didn't register a heartbeat for 12 hours, an automated system would blast this encrypted file to her secure server. She slammed the Enter key to decrypt the payload. A video file popped up on the screen. It was Marcus. He looked exhausted, sitting in a dimly lit safehouse somewhere in Europe. The timestamp was from 3 days ago. "Hey, Donnie," Marcus's digital ghost said, offering a sad, crooked smile. "If you're watching this, it means I caught a bullet. And it means you're probably neck deep in the shit." Danielle touched the screen, a lump forming in her throat. "Listen to me," Marcus continued, his tone turning deadly serious. "I dug too deep. Operation Blackout isn't just about erasing our old unit. The brass isn't just tying up loose ends from Kandahar. It's a coup. Donnie, my father, Arthur, he's using the slush fund to build a private army on U.S. soil. They're going to stage a massive false flag attack next week to seize emergency powers. They needed us dead because we're the only ones who know how to recognize their playbook. Marcus coughed, looking off camera nervously. I've attached the ledger. It has the names, the bank accounts, and the location of their primary staging ground. It's a decommissioned missile silo in the Nevada desert. Facility designation: Cerberus. He leaned into the camera, his eyes burning with desperate intensity. Donnie, they will hunt you to the ends of the earth. You can't run from this. You have to cut the head off the snake. Burn them to the ground. For me, for Elias, for Sarah. Give him hell. Ghost. The video cut to black. The screen displayed a scrolling list of encrypted coordinates, access codes, and offshore bank routing numbers. It was the Holy Grail. It was the definitive proof she needed to blow the conspiracy wide open. Danielle stood frozen for a long moment. She looked back at the news monitors, where talking heads were calling her a monster. Then she looked at the cot, where her 7-year-old son was quietly playing a video game, oblivious to the fact that the entire world was currently hunting his mother. She couldn't stay in the bunker. A cage is still a cage, even if it's made of titanium. If she hid, they would eventually find her, and Ryder would pay the price. There was only one way out. She had to go to Nevada. She had to walk straight into the belly of the beast. Danielle walked over to the weapons rack. She bypassed the Mk-18. She reached higher, pulling down a massive, custom-built M249 squad automatic weapon, light machine gun. It was heavy, brutal, and designed for one thing: absolute, overwhelming destruction. She racked the bolt. Operation Blackout is about to see the light. The hardest part about disappearing isn't running. It's erasing the person you used to be. Danielle stood in front of the small, cracked mirror in the bunker's latrine. In her right hand, she held a straight razor, in her left, a box of cheap, convenience store bleach. She stared at the woman in the glass. The steel gray eyes, the sharp jawline, the long, dark hair tied back in a functional, tactical braid. That was the face currently plastered across every news network, every FBI watch list, and every TSA checkpoint in the Western Hemisphere. That woman had to die right here, in this underground room. With a swift, emotionless stroke, Danielle grabbed her braid and sliced it off at the base of her neck. The heavy lock of hair hit the concrete floor with a soft thud. She didn't blink. She worked the razor over her scalp, cropping her hair into a jagged, uneven pixie cut. Next came the bleach, burning her scalp, transforming the remaining dark stubble into a harsh, brassy blonde. She inserted a pair of dark brown-colored contact lenses, immediately dulling the piercing intensity of her natural eyes. Finally, she took a small piece of dental cotton and wedged it into her left cheek, subtly altering the shape of her jawline. She put on a pair of oversized, cheap wire-rimmed glasses, a faded oversized college sweatshirt, and a pair of worn-out mom jeans. She slumped her shoulders, rounding her perfect, athletic posture into something defeated and ordinary. Ghost 2-0 was gone. In her place stood Catherine Miller, a stressed, exhausted, newly divorced mother from Spokane, Washington. She walked back into the main room. Ryder was sitting on the cot, watching her with wide, uncertain eyes. "Mommy?" he asked tentatively. His voice small. "You look different." Danielle smiled, softening the unfamiliar face. She knelt and pulled a slightly oversized Seattle Mariners baseball cap onto his head, tucking his messy brown curls beneath it. She handed him a pair of thick, plastic-framed glasses with non-prescription lenses. "We're playing a new game, monkey," she said softly, adjusting his collar. "For the next 2 days. My name is Katie. Your name is Leo. We are going on a very long, very boring road trip to visit your grandma in Arizona. We are tired. We are grumpy. And most importantly, we are entirely uninteresting. Do you understand?" Ryder nodded, pushing the glasses up his nose. "I'm Leo. You're Katie. Good boy." They couldn't take the electric dirt bike to Nevada. It was a tactical vehicle, not a cross-country transport. Fortunately, paranoia had always been Danielle's best investment. 5 miles from the bunker, buried beneath a collapsing barn on an abandoned logging property, was the bug-out rig. They hiked through the remaining fog, arriving at the barn just as the sun began to aggressively burn off the Oregon mist. Danielle pulled away the rotting wooden boards to reveal a 1998 Ford F-250 with a camper shell. It was covered in dust and rust spots, looking like a piece of junk destined for the scrapyard. But looks were exactly the point. Under the hood sat a heavily modified, supercharged diesel V8 engine. The doors and camper shell were lined with level 3 Kevlar paneling. The tires were run flats. It was a rolling fortress disguised as a redneck's weekend fishing truck. Danielle loaded the heavy Pelican cases, containing the M249 saw, explosives, and tactical gear, into a hidden false floor in the truck bed. She strapped Ryder into the passenger seat, handed him a juice box, and climbed behind the wheel. The engine roared to life with a deep, guttural growl that vibrated in her chest. "Next stop, the desert," she muttered, shifting the heavy truck into drive. The journey south was a psychological torture test. Danielle kept the AM radio on, listening to the static-filled broadcasts. Every 15 minutes, there was an update on the Portland airport shooter. The reward for her capture had been bumped to $10 million. The FBI had set up a dedicated tip line. The entire country was looking for a highly trained female assassin with dark hair and a small boy. They took the back roads, State Route 395, snaking down through the high desert of eastern Oregon and into the desolate, unforgiving scrubland of Northern California. The lush green pines gave way to endless stretches of brown dirt, sagebrush, and shimmering heat waves. The air conditioner in the old Ford blasted, but the tension in the cab was suffocating. By 4 p.m., the sun was a blinding, angry eye in the sky. They were 10 miles from the Nevada state line when Danielle saw it. A mile ahead, the heat shimmer distorted a cluster of flashing red and blue lights. It wasn't a standard highway patrol speed trap. It was a hard checkpoint. 2 blacked-out Homeland Security SUVs were parked diagonally across the 2-lane highway, bottlenecking traffic. Heavily armed state troopers and National Guardsmen in desert camouflage were stopping every single vehicle, checking trunks, and examining IDs. Danielle's heart slammed against her ribs, but her physical reaction was absolute stillness. Her breathing slowed. "Leo," she said, her voice dropping an octave. Perfectly calm. "Listen to me very carefully. Close your eyes. Lean your head against the window. You have a terrible stomach ache. You don't feel good. And you just want to sleep. Don't open your eyes. No matter what. Ryder immediately slumped against the glass, letting out a convincing, pathetic little groan. The kid was a survivor. Danielle reached beneath her seat. Her fingers brushed the textured grip of her suppressed Glock 19. She unholstered it, wedging it tightly between her left thigh and the center console. Hidden by her oversized sweatshirt but instantly accessible. If this went sideways, she had exactly 4 seconds to drop the 3 guardsmen, punch the accelerator, and ram through the barricade. She slowed the heavy truck to a crawl, joining the short line of 3 cars ahead of her. Through the windshield, she watched the guardsmen. They were tense, hands resting on the pistol grips of their M4 carbines. They were looking for a ghost, and they were terrified they might actually find her. The car in front of them, a beat-up Honda Civic, was cleared. It drove away. Danielle pulled up to the stop sign. A Nevada state trooper, sweating profusely in his uniform, held up a hand. A National Guardsman flanked the passenger side, peering into the cab, his eyes locking onto the sleeping boy. Danielle rolled down the window. The blast of 105-degree desert heat hit her face like an open oven door. "Afternoon, officer," Danielle said. Her voice was slightly whiny, tired, and perfectly pitched to sound like a thoroughly annoyed civilian. She wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead. "Engine off." "Ma'am, keep your hands on the wheel," the trooper ordered. His eyes darted across her face, taking in the brassy blonde hair, the cheap glasses, the cotton-stuffed jawline. He held a laminated sheet of paper. Danielle caught a glimpse of it. It was her JSOC photo. "She killed the engine. Is there a problem, officer? My son has the stomach flu. We've been driving for 12 hours. And I really just want to get to a motel. License and registration. Please, make it slow." Danielle reached into the glove box with exaggerated slowness, pulling out the CIA-grade forged documents for Catherine Miller. She handed them over. The trooper scrutinized the ID. He looked at the license, looked at her face, and looked back at the license. "Where are you heading, Ms. Miller?" "Reno," she sighed, letting a hint of exasperation creep into her voice. "My ex-husband was supposed to take the kid for the week. But he bailed, so now I'm dragging a 6-7-year-old to my mother's house. What's going on here? Did someone escape from a prison or something?" The trooper didn't smile. He tapped the laminated sheet against his thigh. "Just a routine security check. Ma'am." He leaned closer to the window. His eyes locked onto Danielle's, behind the cheap wireframes and the brown contacts. Danielle stared back. She didn't break eye contact. She projected pure, unadulterated suburban exhaustion. Her left hand, resting casually in her lap, shifted a fraction of an inch closer to the grip of the Glock. Her thumb hovered over the safety. One twitch. That's all it takes. On the passenger side, the guardsman tapped on the glass with his knuckles. Ryder groaned loudly, shifting in his seat. He clutched his stomach, his face contorting perfectly. "Mommy, I'm gonna throw up," he mumbled, his eyes squeezed shut. The guardsman immediately took a step back, a look of distinct disgust crossing his young face. Nobody, not even a soldier hunting a terrorist, wants to be in the splash zone of a sick kid. The trooper sighed, the tension draining from his shoulders. He handed the license and registration back to Danielle. The brassy blonde hair and the sick kid didn't fit the profile of a lethal Black Ops assassin running for her life. "All right, Ms. Miller, you're clear. Drive safe. And get that boy some ginger ale." Thank you, officer, Danielle said, her voice dripping with artificial relief. She started the engine, the heavy V8 roaring to life. She didn't peel out. She slowly, agonizingly, drove the speed limit right through the barricade. She watched the red and blue lights fade in her rearview mirror. Once they were 2 miles clear, she pulled the cotton from her cheek and spat it out the window. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. You can open your eyes now, Leo, she said, her voice trembling slightly with residual adrenaline. Ryder sat up, pushing the baseball cap back. He looked at her, a small, proud smile on his face. Did I do good, Mommy? You did perfectly. Baby, you saved us. The sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the barren Nevada landscape. Ahead of them, the road stretched out like a black ribbon cutting through an ocean of sand and rock. Somewhere out there, buried deep beneath the earth, was Cerberus, the belly of the beast. They had slipped through the net. But out here in the desert, there was nowhere left to hide. The stealth game was officially over. When they reached the missile silo, it was going to be loud. The Nevada desert is a land of extremes. By day, it is a blazing anvil that can boil the blood in your veins. By night, it is a freezing, star-swept void that drains the warmth from your bones. At 11 p.m., the heavily armored Ford F-250 rolled off the asphalt of State Route 375 and crunched onto a desolate, unnamed dirt road. They were 50 miles from the nearest town, deep in the heart of the Great Basin. There were no streetlights, no other cars, just an endless ocean of silver sagebrush illuminated by a razor-thin crescent moon. Danielle navigated using the truck's offline GPS, matching the coordinates Marcus had sent her in his final message. 3 miles from the target, the terrain grew rugged, rising into a series of jagged, rocky foothills. She killed the headlights and the engine, letting the heavy truck coast silently into a dry, deep ravine hidden from the main plateau. She engaged the parking brake. The sudden silence of the desert was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the cooling supercharged engine. She turned to Ryder. The boy was wide awake, clutching his teddy bear. The Leo persona had vanished. He was just a terrified 7-year-old boy again. Okay, monkey. This is the end of the line for the truck, Danielle said softly, unbuckling her seatbelt. She climbed into the back of the camper shell and opened the hidden floor compartment. She didn't pull out the weapons first. She pulled out a thick, insulated sleeping bag, a crate of MREs, bottled water, and a heavy-duty military distress beacon. We are going to camp right here in the truck, she told him, wrapping the sleeping bag around his shoulders. The Kevlar-lined camper shell was as close to a tank as she could provide. You have your tablet, you have your food, and you have this. She placed the distress beacon, a small black box with a single, covered red button, into his hands. If the sun comes up and goes down again, and I am not back, you flip this cover and press the button. It will send a signal to some very nice people who will come in a helicopter to get you. But you only press it if I don't come back tomorrow night. Do you understand? Ryder looked at the box, then up at his mother. His lower lip quivered. Where are you going, Mommy? Are you going to fight the bad men who hurt Uncle Marcus? Danielle's heart ached. She hated that his innocence was collateral damage in this war. But lying to him now would be an insult to his bravery. Yes, she said, her voice dropping to a serious, steady whisper. I have to stop them from hurting anyone else. I have to finish the job." Ryder reached out and wrapped his small arms around her neck, hugging her with desperate, fierce strength. "You're a superhero. Mommy, come back. I always come back for you," she whispered into his hair, committing the smell of him to memory. She kissed his forehead, pulled away, and locked the reinforced door of the camper shell from the outside. He was as safe as she could make him. Now, she had to ensure there was a world left for him to grow up in. Danielle shed the oversized mom jeans and the college sweatshirt. The brassy blonde hair remained, a jarring contrast to the matte black tactical gear she now strapped onto her body. Level 4 ceramic plates, Kevlar helmet, night vision goggles. She reached into the armory cache. She slung the suppressed Mk-18 short-barreled rifle across her back. Then, she hoisted the M249 squad automatic weapon. It was a beast of a machine gun, weighing 22 pounds fully loaded. She clipped a 200-round plastic box magazine of 5.56 mm tracer and armor-piercing rounds to the receiver. Slamming the belt into the feed tray with a heavy, metallic clack, she strapped 3 extra box magazines to her chest rig, along with 4 M67 fragmentation grenades and 6 blocks of C4 plastic explosives. She was carrying over 80 pounds of gear. She felt lighter than she had in days. Ghost 2-0. Going dark. Danielle pulled down her NVGs. The dark desert erupted into a crisp, glowing green landscape. She began the 3-mile hike over the rocky ridge. She moved with the fluid, silent grace of a panther, her boots avoiding loose scree and dried twigs. At 1:15 a.m., she crested the final ridge and dropped to her stomach, crawling to the edge of an overhang. A mile below her sat facility Cerberus. To a satellite, it looked like an abandoned zinc mining operation. A cluster of rusted corrugated metal buildings, a chain-link fence, and a few dusty pickup trucks. But through the thermal optics of Danielle's binoculars, the illusion evaporated. The heat signatures were massive. Massive underground generators were venting hot air through disguised exhaust pipes. There were 4 elevated guard towers disguised as old water silos. And patrolling the perimeter were squads of men in full tactical gear, carrying military-grade rifles, accompanied by Belgian Malinois attack dogs. Arthur Vance had built a fortress. Danielle analyzed the patrol routes. 2-man overlapping teams, 75 seconds between visual contacts at the northern fence line. It was tight, but tight meant predictable. She began her descent, sliding through the shadows of the boulders until she reached the valley floor. The wind was blowing toward her, carrying her scent away from the dogs. Luck was finally on her side. She crept to within 50 yards of the northern perimeter fence. A 2-man patrol was approaching. They were chatting quietly, complacent in their perceived isolation. Danielle rested the heavy M249 on a rock. Out of sight, she unslung the Mk-18. This required silence. She waited until the patrol reached the darkest section of the fence line. Perfectly aligned. Breathe. Squeeze. Peefed. The first suppressed round took the trailing guard in the side of the head, dropping him instantly into the dust. The lead guard whipped around at the sound of the body hitting the dirt. He opened his mouth to yell, reaching for his radio. Peefed. Peefed. A double tap to the center of his chest. He collapsed backward, his rifle clattering softly against the chain-link fence. Danielle was moving before they stopped twitching. She reached the fence, pulled a pair of heavy-duty insulated bolt cutters from her back, and snipped a vertical slit through the steel mesh just large enough to squeeze through. She dragged the bodies into the thickest patch of sagebrush and relieved them of their radios. "Perimeter Team 2, check in," a voice crackled on the stolen comms. Danielle didn't answer. She knew she had exactly 30 seconds before Command realized Team 2 was missing and sounded the alarm. Stealth was officially over. It was time to go loud. She sprinted across the open dirt courtyard, the heavy M249 bouncing against her hip, making a beeline for the largest structure, a massive concrete bunker disguised as a mining warehouse. The blast doors were heavy steel, designed to withstand a nuclear shockwave. She reached the doors as the base klaxons suddenly began to wail. A harsh, mechanical siren tore through the quiet desert night. Floodlights snapped on, turning the compound as bright as high noon. "Intruder, northern fence line, light him up." Bullets began to kick up the dirt around her feet, sparking against the concrete walls. The guard towers had spotted her. Danielle didn't seek cover. She slapped 3 blocks of C4 onto the hydraulic hinges of the massive steel doors, jammed the detonators in, and dove behind a rusted bulldozer parked nearby. "Knock, knock," she growled, and squeezed the remote detonator. The explosion was catastrophic. A blinding flash of orange fire illuminated the desert, followed by a shockwave that rattled Danielle's teeth. The heavy steel doors didn't just open, they were ripped from their hinges and blown inward, vanishing into the dark, cavernous tunnel beyond. A thick cloud of smoke and concrete dust billowed out of the entrance. The guard towers poured fully automatic fire into the dust cloud, trying to pin her down. Danielle pulled the pin on a fragmentation grenade, cooked it for 2 seconds, and hurled it toward the closest guard tower. Boom! The machine gun fire from that tower ceased instantly amid a shower of sparks and screams. She stood up from behind the bulldozer, lifting the massive M249 to her shoulder. She didn't flinch as bullets cracked the air inches from her face. She stepped into the swirling smoke of the breached entrance, flipping the safety off her machine gun. She had descended into hell, and she was going to make sure the devil remembered her name. Smoke is a liar. To the untrained eye, it offers a false sense of security, a thick gray curtain that hides you from the world. But to a Tier 1 operator, smoke is just a canvas waiting to be painted with violence. Danielle stepped through the shattered remains of the blast doors and into the yawning concrete throat of Facility Cerberus. The air was thick with the acrid stench of pulverized rock and vaporized C4. Red emergency strobes cut frantically through the dust, casting long, demonic shadows against the curved tunnel walls. 30 yards down the primary access corridor, a 4-man Quick Reaction Force (QRF) had set up a hasty barricade behind overturned steel cargo crates. They had their M4 carbines raised, aiming blindly into the settling dust cloud, waiting for a target. They expected a squad. They expected a tactical, slow-moving infiltration. They didn't expect a mother with nothing left to lose and a belt-fed machine gun. Danielle didn't aim down the sights at this range. With the M249 squad automatic weapon, it was about volume, not precision. She braced the heavy stock against her hip, leaned into the weapon's massive weight, and squeezed the trigger. The saw didn't fire, it roared. It was a deafening, mechanical scream that vibrated in the marrow of her bones. She dumped a continuous, 5-second burst down the tunnel, 800 rounds a minute. Every fifth bullet was a tracer, creating a solid, blinding laser beam of neon red fire that ripped through the smoke. The 5.56 mm armor-piercing rounds chewed the steel barricade to jagged splinters. The QRF team didn't even have a chance to return fire. The sheer kinetic suppression of the machine gun pinned them down, the concrete walls turning into a blender of ricochets and flying shrapnel. 2 men went down instantly, their ceramic plates shattering under the overwhelming impact. The remaining 2 broke cover, screaming as they scrambled back down the tunnel. Danielle released the trigger, the barrel of the saw glowing a dull, angry orange. The sudden silence was ringing, punctuated only by the clatter of hundreds of empty brass casings rolling across the floor. She didn't stop moving. Momentum was life. She pushed forward, her boots crunching over the debris. The tunnel sloped downward at a sharp 20-degree angle, a design meant to move massive payloads deep underground. Intruder is in the main artery. Fall back to Sector 4. Seal the bulkheads. The stolen earpiece in her ear was a chorus of localized panic. They were terrified. The ghost they had been hunting was currently tearing their fortress apart from the inside. Ahead of her, a massive, foot-thick titanium bulkhead began to slide shut, threatening to seal off the lower levels. The gap was closing fast. 4 feet, 3 feet. Danielle sprinted. She slung the heavy M249 onto her back, the weapon bruising her spine. And dove headfirst, she slid across the slick, blood-streaked concrete on her chest carrier, scraping through the gap just as the heavy titanium doors slammed shut behind her with a final, echoing boom. She was locked in. There was no retreating now. She rose to her feet, brushing the dust from her combat shirt. She was standing in the antechamber of the facility's command center. The raw concrete of the tunnel gave way to pristine, sterile white walls, recessed LED lighting, and reinforced glass. She unslung the M249, letting it hang by its tactical strap, and drew the suppressed Mk18. The machine gun was too clumsy for close-quarters battle, CQB. She needed the scalpel now, not the sledgehammer. She stacked up against the glass double doors of the command center. Inside, it looked like a Silicon Valley tech hub grafted onto a military bunker. Rows of server racks hummed with power. A massive, curved holographic display dominated the front wall, illuminating the faces of half a dozen panicked technicians and 2 heavily armed PMC guards. Danielle breached. She kicked the door handle, shattering the locking mechanism, and flowed into the room. Peefed, peefed. The first guard took 2 suppressed rounds to the chest before he could raise his weapon. The second guard lunged for a heavy panic button on the desk. Danielle pivoted seamlessly, her Mk18 tracking his movement. Peefed. A single shot through the side of his Kevlar helmet. He slumped over the console, dead before he hit the floor. Hands. Danielle screamed, her voice a guttural, terrifying bark that echoed off the glass walls. Hands on your heads, right now. The 6 technicians, wearing neatly pressed civilian clothes, dropped to their knees immediately, their hands laced behind their heads. They were keyboard warriors, not soldiers. They were trembling. Danielle kept her rifle raised, her eyes sweeping the room for hidden threats. Clear. She walked over to the primary control terminal, kicking the dead guard's chair out of the way. "Who is the senior systems engineer?" she demanded. A pale, balding man in his 50s slowly raised a shaking hand. I am. Please, we're just contractors. Log in, Danielle ordered, grabbing him by the collar and hauling him to his feet. She shoved him toward the keyboard. Full administrative access. Do it now, or you catch a bullet. The man's fingers flew across the keys, entering a complex series of passcodes. The main holographic display flashed green. System unlocked. Danielle shoved him back down to the floor. She reached into her vest and pulled out the decrypted USB drive she had downloaded from Marcus's dead man's switch. She jammed it into the console. Let's see what you died for, Marcus, she whispered. She executed the decryption key. Instantly, the massive screen shifted from a benign blue layout to a terrifying tactical map of the western United States. A series of red targets bloomed across the grid. Danielle's breath hitched as she read the scrolling data. Marcus was right. It was a false flag operation. But the scale was beyond anything she could have imagined. It wasn't a bomb in a city square. The holographic display centered on the Hoover Dam, the massive concrete structure holding back Lake Mead. Below it, a detailed readout displayed the payload. Asset: UGM-109 Tomahawk land attack missile. Warhead: conventional high explosive. Bunker buster configuration. Status: Silo 1 fueled and armed. Arthur Vance wasn't just trying to cause panic. He was going to breach the Hoover Dam. The resulting catastrophic flood would wipe out millions of lives downstream, obliterate the power grid for 3 states, and cripple the American Southwest. In the ensuing chaos, the president would be forced to declare martial law. And Arthur Vance, with his private, shadow-funded army waiting in the wings, would step in to restore order. A bloodless coup, paid for with 1 million innocent lives. And the worst part? The launch vector was programmed to spoof a Chinese submarine signal. Vance was going to start World War III to cover his tracks. In the corner of the screen, a digital timer was ticking down mercilessly in glowing red numbers. T-minus 18:00 minutes to launch. 18 minutes. Cancel the launch sequence. Danielle barked at the systems engineer, pressing the hot suppressor of her Mk-18 against the back of his neck. Now. The man was sobbing. I can't. I swear to God I can't. It's an air-gapped system. Once the countdown hits 20 minutes, the firing sequence is locked out of the mainframe. It can only be aborted manually from the launch control pod, down in the silo core. Suddenly, the large communication screen on the wall flickered to life. The image was grainy, broadcast over a heavily encrypted satellite link, but the face was unmistakable. Arthur Vance. He was lying in a hospital bed, an oxygen tube strapped under his nose, his right shoulder heavily bandaged and braced. He looked pale, weak, and hollowed out by the armor-piercing round that had nearly torn him in half. But his eyes were sharp, burning with a cold, sociopathic fanaticism. I have to admit, Danielle. Vance's voice rasped over the command center speakers. He sounded out of breath, every word costing him pain. I underestimated you. My son always said you were the best trigger puller JSOC ever produced. I should have listened to him. Danielle stared at the screen, her grip tightening on her rifle until her knuckles turned white. You murdered your own son, Arthur. You sent killers to my home, to my child. Vance offered a weak, dismissive smile. Sacrifices. Danielle, we are soldiers. We understand that blood waters the tree of liberty. This country is soft. It is rotting from the inside out. It needs a reset. It needs a tragedy so profound that it begs for strong men to take the reins. My son was weak. He couldn't see the big picture. The big picture is you slaughtering 1,000,000 people for a power grab. Danielle spat. History won't remember the water. Danielle. They will only remember who built the ark. Vance wheezed. You are a remarkable weapon. But even the best weapons can be boxed up. Vance pressed a button on a remote by his hospital bed. Instantly, the emergency lighting in the command center shifted from red to a blinding, flashing amber. Heavy steel shutters slammed down over the glass walls, sealing the room. Facility lockdown overridden. A synthesized voice announced over the PA system. Purge protocol initiated in the command center. Halon gas release in T-60 seconds. The technicians on the floor began to scream in raw terror. Halon gas was designed to extinguish server fires by rapidly sucking all the oxygen out of the room. It would suffocate everyone inside in minutes. You have 17 minutes until the missile launches. Danielle. Vance whispered, leaning his head back against his pillows. But you only have 1 minute of air left. Goodbye, ghost. The screen cut to black. The terrifying hiss of pressurized gas began to echo from the ceiling vents. The air in the room instantly grew cold and thin. Danielle Knox didn't panic. She didn't scream. She looked at the heavy steel shutters. She looked at the ticking countdown clock. And she looked down at the blocks of C4 still strapped to her chest. Arthur Vance thought he had put her in a box. He forgot that she was the one who blows boxes apart. Halon gas doesn't poison you. It simply starves you. It is heavier than air. Designed to flood a room from the floor up, violently displacing every molecule of oxygen to choke out a fire. Or, in this case, to choke out a ghost. The hissing from the ceiling vents was deafening. The 6 civilian technicians were already panicking, clawing at their own throats as the invisible tide of gas rose around their knees. Danielle Knox didn't gasp. She controlled her breathing, dropping her heart rate to slow the consumption of oxygen in her blood. She had roughly 45 seconds of usable consciousness before hypoxia set in, followed by a permanent sleep. Arthur Vance had dropped heavy steel blast shutters over the reinforced glass doors. A standard explosive charge would bounce off the steel and turn the sealed room into a pressurized blender, liquefying the internal organs of everyone inside. She needed a shaped charge. A directional breach. Behind the server racks. Now, Danielle roared at the coughing technicians. Open your mouths and cover your ears. Or your eardrums will explode. She didn't wait to see if they obeyed. She sprinted to the heavy steel shutters sealing the main entrance. She pulled 2 blocks of C4 from her chest rig. She needed to focus the blast outward. She grabbed a heavy, hollow metal fire extinguisher from the wall, unscrewed the top, and dumped the chemical foam onto the floor. She stuffed the raw C4 inside the empty steel cylinder, effectively creating a makeshift-shaped charge cannon. She wedged the open end of the extinguisher directly against the deadbolt mechanism of the steel shutter, bracing it with a heavy office desk. She jammed a detonator into the putty, set a 5-second delay, and sprinted for the server racks. She dove behind the humming metal towers, opened her jaw wide to equalize the pressure in her head, and covered her ears. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The explosion in the sealed room was apocalyptic. The shockwave hit Danielle like a physical punch to the chest, knocking the breath from her lungs. But the physics worked. The metal cylinder of the fire extinguisher directed 90% of the blast energy forward. The heavy steel shutter didn't just break, it bowed outward. The locking mechanism shattering into 1,000 pieces of lethal shrapnel. The reinforced glass behind it vaporized into diamond dust. Instantly, the pressure differential violently sucked the heavy halon gas out into the hallway, pulling in a rush of cold, sweet, concrete-dusted oxygen. Danielle sucked in a massive breath, her lungs burning. She rolled to her feet. The technicians were bleeding from their noses and weeping, but they were breathing. She looked at the digital timer on the ruined holographic display. T-1420 to launch. Stay here, she growled at the civilians. She grabbed the M249 saw from the floor and stepped out of the shattered doorway. The command center was on level 2. The missile silo core, the physical launch pod, was on level 5. Buried deep in the bedrock. The elevators were undoubtedly locked down or rigged to trap her. That left the maintenance stairwells. Danielle moved like a woman possessed. She bypassed the main corridors, finding a heavy steel door marked Stairwell C, authorized personnel only. She shot the lock off with her suppressed Mk-18 and kicked it open. The stairwell was a narrow, vertical concrete tube plunging into the darkness, illuminated only by flickering amber emergency lights. As she hit the landing for level 3, the radio in her earpiece crackled. It was Viper Actual, the PMC commander from the airport. He sounded angry. She breached the command center. I want heavy weapons in the silo core. Lock down level 5. If she comes down those stairs, you turn her into dog meat. Danielle didn't slow down. She let the Mk-18 drop to its sling and gripped the M249 saw with both hands. She rounded the corner to level 4. 4 PMCs in heavy juggernaut armor were stacked on the landing, waiting for her, aiming modified AW-12 automatic shotguns up the stairwell. Danielle didn't give them a chance to pull the trigger. She threw herself onto the concrete landing above them, sliding on her stomach, and held down the trigger of the M249. The enclosed stairwell amplified the roar of the machine gun into a physical force. It was a hurricane of lead and fire. The 5.56 armor-piercing rounds shredded the concrete stairs, ricocheting violently. The juggernaut armor was thick, but it wasn't designed to withstand sustained, point-blank machine gun fire. Sparks flew as the rounds chewed through their ceramic plates. 2 men fell backward, tumbling down the stairs in a tangle of ruined armor and blood. The remaining 2 PMCs blindly fired their shotguns upward. A spray of heavy buckshot slammed into the concrete inches from Danielle's face, peppering her cheek with razor-sharp stone fragments. She rolled sideways, pulled the pin on a fragmentation grenade, let the spoon fly, and counted. 1, 2. She dropped it down the gap between the stair rails. It detonated mid-air, right at head level for the remaining guards. The blast threw them against the concrete walls like broken toys. Danielle ignored the blood dripping from her cheek. She checked her watch. T-8:45. She leapt over the bodies, her boots slipping on the slick, blood-covered stairs, and hit the level 5 blast door. It was painted a harsh, industrial yellow with the words Silo Access stenciled in black. She didn't bother with explosives. The locking wheel was on her side. She spun it, hauled the heavy door open, and stepped into the silo. The scale of the room was dizzying. It was a massive, cylindrical cavern carved out of the earth. In the dead center, Suspended over a terrifyingly deep exhaust shaft was the Tomahawk land attack missile. It was painted flag gray, sleek, and humming with pre-launch electrical power. Thick fueling umbilicals were still attached to its fuselage. A narrow steel catwalk led to a suspended, bulletproof glass pod overlooking the missile, the launch control center. Standing on the catwalk, blocking the path to the pod, was Viper Actual. He was a mountain of a man, stripped of his heavy plate carrier for mobility, wearing a black tactical shirt that strained against his muscles. He held an M4 carbine, but as Danielle stepped onto the catwalk, he casually tossed the rifle over the railing. It clattered into the abyss below. He drew a massive, fixed-blade karambit knife from his belt. "You've cost me a lot of good men tonight, Ghost," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that echoed over the hum of the missile. "Mr. Vance said you were good. Let's see if you're good without the element of surprise." Danielle looked at her M249. The ammunition belt was empty. She let the heavy machine gun slide off her shoulder, letting it hit the steel grating. She unholstered her Mk-18. But before she could raise it, Viper Actual lunged with terrifying speed. He closed the 20-foot gap in 3 strides, swatting the barrel of her rifle away with his left forearm and slashing the karambit toward her throat. Danielle leaned back, the curved blade whistling a fraction of an inch past her windpipe. She dropped the rifle and drew her own combat knife in a reverse grip. It wasn't a tactical gunfight anymore. It was a brutal, intimate slaughter on a 2-foot-wide steel bridge over a bottomless pit. Viper slashed again, aiming for her femoral artery. Danielle parried with the flat of her blade. Stepping inside his guard, she drove her left elbow brutally into his nose. Hearing the cartilage crunch, he grunted, absorbing the blow, and grabbed her tactical vest, hurling her against the steel railing. The breath left her lungs. He drove his knee into her stomach, then raised the karambit for a downward, lethal strike to her collarbone. Danielle didn't block it. She let him commit to the downward thrust, twisting her torso at the last possible millisecond. The blade bit deeply into the meat of her left shoulder, scraping against the bone. Pain flared, white-hot and blinding, but she used it, with his arm extended and his weapon buried in her shoulder. He was anchored. Danielle gripped his wrist with her left hand, locking the blade inside her own flesh so he couldn't pull it out. With her free right hand, she drove her combat knife upward, under his ribcage, angling the 6-inch blade directly into his heart. She twisted the handle. Viper Actual's eyes widened in absolute shock. The strength vanished from his massive frame. He choked on his own blood, his grip loosening on the karambit. Danielle yanked her knife out and shoved him backward. He toppled over the waist-high railing, falling silently into the darkness of the exhaust shaft. She collapsed to her knees on the grating, clutching her bleeding shoulder. Her vision blurred. She looked up at the digital countdown clock glowing ominously on the side of the launch control pod. T-312. She dragged herself up, pulling the karambit from her shoulder with a sickening shhhk, and stumbled toward the pod door. She slapped her bloody palm against the access panel. It hissed open. Inside the pod, the control console was a terrifying array of red lights and automated sequences. A massive red abort button sat under a clear plastic shield. Danielle smashed the plastic shield with the hilt of her knife and slammed her fist down on the abort button. A harsh buzzer sounded. The screen flashed a bright, angry red. Error. Manual override requires biometric authorization. Senior command level only. Danielle stared at the screen, her blood running cold. It required Arthur Vance's fingerprint, or the fingerprint of someone with his exact clearance. She looked around the empty pod. She was the only living soul left in the silo. The missile hummed louder, the fueling umbilicals disconnecting with a heavy metallic clatter, preparing for ignition. T-2 o'clock. The Hoover Dam, millions of lives. Ryder, sitting in a truck in the desert, waiting for a mother who promised to come back. She didn't have a fingerprint. She didn't have a code. But she did have 4 blocks of C4 left, and a missile filled with high-explosive rocket fuel. T-145. The automated voice of the launch control system was perfectly calm, a stark, terrifying contrast to the chaotic pounding of Danielle's heart. Primary fueling complete, internal gyros spinning up, silo bay doors opening. High above, at the very top of the massive concrete cylinder, the grinding shriek of heavy machinery echoed down the shaft. The reinforced roof of Facility Cerberus was slowly parting, revealing a narrow sliver of the cold, star-swept Nevada sky. Danielle stood in the glass pod, her left arm hanging uselessly at her side, blood soaking through her black tactical shirt from the deep knife wound in her shoulder. The biometric scanner on the console blinked a mocking, steady red. She couldn't abort the launch digitally. Arthur Vance had made sure of that. But Vance was a politician who thought in codes and clearances. Danielle Knox was a Tier 1 operator who thought in physics and high explosives. If she couldn't turn the missile off, she would tear its heart out. She slammed her hand against the POD's exit panel. The door hissed open. She stepped back out onto the steel catwalk overlooking the abyss. The Tomahawk missile was 10 feet away, suspended in the center of the silo by a complex network of steel gantries and release clamps. T-115. Danielle holstered her Mk-18. She needed both hands, even if one was screaming in agony. She climbed over the railing of the catwalk and leapt across the dizzying gap, her combat boots slamming hard onto the narrow steel ring of the missile's primary gantry. She was inches from the weapon now. The metallic skin of the Tomahawk hummed with violent, vibrating energy. She ripped the heavy Velcro pouch off her chest rig with her teeth. Inside were the last 4 blocks of C4 plastic explosive and 2 chemical detonators. She didn't place the explosives on the warhead. Detonating a bunker buster underground would vaporize the entire facility, the mountain, and her along with it. She needed a sympathetic detonation. She needed the missile to destroy itself without triggering the primary payload. She shimmied down the gantry ladder, her blood making the steel rungs slick and treacherous. She stopped at the base of the missile, right where the solid rocket booster met the primary fuel valves. Ignition sequence locked. Launch imminent. The synthesized voice droned. T-045. Danielle mashed all 4 blocks of C4 together into a single, massive lump of gray clay. She molded it directly over the primary fuel injection manifold, the weakest point of the booster's armored casing. She jammed the twin detonators deep into the putty. She didn't have a remote detonator left. She only had a manual twist timer. She set it for 30 seconds. She twisted the cap. The tiny red LED on the detonator blinked to life. Tick. Danielle didn't look back. She scrambled up the gantry ladder, her wounded shoulder tearing with every pull. Pain blinded her. turning the edges of her vision a fuzzy, static gray. But every time her grip faltered, she saw Ryder's terrified, hopeful face in the dark of that camper shell. "I always come back for you." She reached the catwalk level, launched herself across the gap, and hit the steel grating hard. She scrambled to her feet, her boots slipping on Viper Actual's blood, and sprinted for the level 5 blast door. T-020. She threw her entire body weight against the heavy yellow door, hauling it open just wide enough to slip through. She threw herself into the concrete stairwell, slamming the heavy steel shut behind her and spinning the locking wheel. 10, 9, 8. The launch countdown echoed faintly through the thick steel. Danielle didn't run up the stairs. She dove flat onto the concrete landing, curled into a tight fetal position, opened her mouth wide, and covered the back of her neck with her hands. 3, 2, 1. For a fraction of a millisecond, there was absolute silence. Then, the mountain fractured. The C4 detonated exactly as the Tomahawk's solid rocket booster ignited. The resulting explosion didn't just breach the fuel line, it turned the entire bottom half of the missile into a pressurized bomb. Thousands of gallons of highly volatile rocket fuel ignited simultaneously inside the enclosed concrete silo. The silo acted like the barrel of a massive shotgun. It directed the unimaginable force of the blast straight up through the foot-thick steel of the blast door. Danielle felt the shockwave hit. The sound was beyond human comprehension. It was a physical entity that shook the fillings in her teeth and ruptured the capillaries in her nose. The heavy steel door bowed violently outward, glowing cherry red around the edges as superheated plasma filled the silo on the other side. The concrete stairs beneath her heaved and cracked. The entire subterranean facility groaned as the structural integrity of the mountain was compromised. Dust, chunks of plaster, and shattered light fixtures rained down on her in the pitch-black stairwell. Then, the secondary explosion hit. The Tomahawk's warhead, caught in the inferno, finally cooked off. The shockwave threw Danielle a foot into the air. She slammed back down onto the concrete, the breath driven entirely from her lungs. The world faded into a violent, ringing blackness. She didn't know how long she was out. When Danielle finally opened her eyes, she was choking on pulverized concrete. The emergency lights were dead. The only illumination was the faint, hellish orange glow bleeding through the warped edges of the level 5 blast door. She pushed herself up on one arm. Her entire body felt like it had been run over by a freight train. Her left arm was entirely numb. Blood dripped from her nose and ears. She pulled a small tactical flashlight from her belt and clicked it on. The beam cut through the thick, choking dust. The stairwell above her was partially collapsed, blocked by rebar and shattered concrete slabs. No, she staggered to her feet, her legs shaking uncontrollably. She couldn't die here, not under the dirt, not when she had made a promise. She slung the Mk-18 over her good shoulder and began to climb. She crawled over the jagged rubble, ignoring the sharp rebar tearing at her clothes and skin. She dug with her one good hand, hauling rocks out of the way, squeezing through gaps barely wide enough for her shoulders. It was a suffocating, agonizing ascent. She reached the level 2 landing. The door to the command center was blown completely off its hinges. Inside, the holographic screens were dead. The room completely gutted by the shockwave that had traveled up the ventilation shafts. There was no sign of the technicians. They had either escaped or been buried. Danielle kept climbing. Level 1. The main access tunnel. The tunnel was a war zone of burning vehicles and collapsed ceiling supports. The PMC mercenaries who had survived the blast were nowhere to be seen. They had abandoned the facility the moment the mountain started coming down. She stumbled toward the faint, gray light at the end of the tunnel. Every step was a battle against gravity and blood loss. She leaned heavily against the scorched concrete walls, dragging her boots through the debris. Finally, she breached the entrance. The cold, biting air of the Nevada desert hit her face. It was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. Danielle collapsed to her knees in the dirt just outside the ruined gates of Cerberus. She looked up. The sun was just beginning to rise over the jagged peaks of the Great Basin, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of purple, gold, and blood red. A mile away, a massive pillar of black smoke billowed from the top of the mountain, marking the grave of Arthur Vance's apocalyptic ambition. The Hoover Dam was safe. Millions of people would wake up this morning, drink their coffee, and never know how close they came to the end of the world. But Danielle didn't care about the millions. She only cared about one. She forced herself back to her feet. She had a 3-mile hike over rocky terrain to get back to the ravine. She started walking, one foot in front of the other. The ghost was gone. Ghost 20 had died in the fires of that silo. The woman limping through the sagebrush, bleeding and broken under the rising sun, was just a mother going home to her son. 3 miles. In her prime, during the grueling selection courses at Fort Bragg, Danielle Knox could run 3 miles in 18 minutes with a 60-pound ruck. But this morning, every single step was a negotiation with gravity. The Nevada sun climbed higher, turning the freezing desert air into a baking oven. Danielle's left arm was strapped to her chest with a makeshift tourniquet fashioned from her own tactical vest. She left a trail of dark, heavy drops of blood on the sun-bleached rocks. She didn't have the energy to cover her tracks anymore. It didn't matter. There was no one left in that mountain to follow her. It took her 2 hours to cross the jagged foothills. When she finally crested the last ridge and looked down into the dry, shadowed ravine, her breath caught in her throat. The rusted, bulletproof Ford F-250 was exactly where she had left it. Untouched, undiscovered. Danielle slid down the embankment, her boots kicking up clouds of yellow dust. She reached the back of the camper shell. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely grip the keys. She fumbled with the heavy padlock, the metal clicking loudly in the quiet canyon. She threw the doors open. Ryder was huddled in the corner of the Kevlar-lined bed, wrapped tightly in the military sleeping bag. In his small hands, he held the black distress beacon. The cover was flipped open, his thumb resting nervously over the red button. But he hadn't pressed it. When the sunlight hit his face, he blinked, his eyes adjusting. He saw the brassy blonde hair, the soot-covered face, the blood-soaked clothes, and the exhaustion that radiated from every inch of her body. "Mommy?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. Danielle dropped to her knees on the tailgate. The adrenaline finally abandoned her, leaving nothing but a profound, overwhelming wave of relief. "I'm here, monkey," she choked out, tears cutting clean tracks through the dirt and gunpowder residue on her cheeks. "I'm right here." Ryder dropped the beacon. He scrambled across the camper bed and threw his arms around her neck, burying his face in her good shoulder. He was crying, heavy, silent sobs that shook his entire frame. Danielle wrapped her right arm around him. pulling him so close she could feel his heartbeat syncing with hers. "I told you I'd come back. I promised." They stayed like that for a long time. An island of love in an ocean of violence. Finally, Danielle pulled back. She kissed his forehead. "You did so good. Baby. You were so brave. But we have one last thing to do before we can go home. Okay?" Ryder nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. Danielle climbed into the cab of the truck. She didn't start the engine. Instead, she flipped open the encrypted satellite communications terminal built into the dashboard. She plugged in the USB drive containing Marcus's dead man switch data. The Cerberus schematics, the offshore bank accounts, and the detailed plans for the Hoover Dam strike. She opened a secure, untraceable broadcasting node. Recipient: New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, BBC, Reuters, the U.S. Department of Justice, the Congressional Oversight Committee. Subject: Operation Blackout, Facility Cerberus Evidence. She didn't write a long manifesto. She typed exactly 4 words. Message: Ghosts don't stay buried. She hit send. The progress bar flashed across the screen. 20%, 50%, 100%. Data packet delivered. Half a continent away, in a secure VIP suite at Walter Reed Military Medical Center. Arthur Vance was watching a blank television screen, waiting for the news of a catastrophic flood. Instead, the screen flickered to life with breaking news alerts. But it wasn't the Hoover Dam. It was his own face, his own bank accounts, and Marcus's confession video broadcasting to 300 million Americans. The FBI would be at his hospital door in less than 5 minutes. His private army was destroyed. His legacy was ashes. And his life was over. Danielle closed the terminal. The war was officially over. She reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a heavy, standard-issue first aid kit. She popped 2 military-grade painkillers, swallowing them dry. With Ryder watching quietly from the passenger seat, she methodically cleaned and packed the knife wound in her shoulder, gritting her teeth against the searing pain. She stripped off the blood-soaked tactical gear, throwing the Kevlar plates and the ruined black shirt into the desert dirt. She pulled on a clean, oversized flannel shirt and a fresh pair of jeans. She took a wet wipe and carefully scrubbed the combat paint and soot from her face. She looked in the rearview mirror. The hardened, lethal killer who had dismantled a private army was gone. The ghost was dead. Staring back at her was just a mother, scarred, exhausted, but completely and undeniably free. Danielle turned the key in the ignition. The heavy diesel V8 roared to life. A comforting, powerful rumble that chased away the silence of the desert. She shifted the truck into drive and pulled out of the ravine, turning the massive wheels south, toward the Mexican border. Toward the ocean, toward a place where snow and rain didn't hide assassins in the dark. "Where are we going, Mommy?" Ryder asked, buckling his seatbelt. He looked out the window at the endless expanse of the Nevada highway. Danielle rolled down the windows, letting the warm desert wind whip through the cab. A genuine, unburdened smile finally broke across her face. "Anywhere we want, Leo," she said. "Anywhere we want." The rusted Ford F-250 drove down the empty asphalt, shrinking into a speck against the vastness of the Great Basin, until it disappeared completely into the light of the rising sun.